Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome everyone to the TPB meeting. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone also for Tuesday, February 14th. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And first item is approval of the agenda for today and move to approve.
Second. We
have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion passes unanimously. The next item is approval of the minutes from January 10th. Everyone's had an opportunity to review those. Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion in 2 seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is director's report. I'm going to turn it over to Chad, and he's got several things to talk about.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Members of the Transportation Policy Body, good afternoon. Last month, we had staff had reported to you on the long-range transportation plan and activities upcoming. Today, we have some funding commitments and short-range transportation plan called Transportation Improvement Program, TIP, and TIP amendment and some grant opportunities and funding opportunities in today's meeting. Just want to provide an overview of today's meeting. There are a few items in this report. The first item, you have seen the schedule on the long-range transportation plan. And the second item is a bike ped webinar series that's in the packet, the schedule of upcoming bike ped webinar series that WAMPO staff is hosting. It's also on the website. Now, the third item is sidewalk mileage for jurisdiction. This is at the request of our vice chair that staff has compiled mileage by each jurisdiction in GIS. That's in your packets as well. There are a few items that 3 or 4 items that I would like to request Ashley, our transportation planning manager, Ashley Byers, to present. So let me request Ashley to present the next.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Byers. I'm the transportation planning manager here at WAMPO. And the automatic bike ped counters is a pretty exciting project that we're kind of kicking off. We have some funding in our UPWP to purchase automatic bike ped counters. And so we would like to do a pilot with various jurisdictions in the area. So please let us know if you would like to participate. We are thinking that the local jurisdiction would pay the 20% local match, and then we would use our federal money for the 80% part. So please talk to me about that. And then the United Community Transit Coalition meeting is we're having our first meeting on Thursday. And this is a group working with Jessica Warren, who's a mobility manager for the area, to see how we can coordinate transit better in order to provide more services and help for people who need transit. And then we have a survey going on for the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. We are asking anyone who uses transportation in any form to take this survey to let us know what your safety concerns are so we can try to address those. And then the MTP 2050 Planning Assistance RFP status, we put out an RFP and it closed. When did it close? Last week, I think. And we'll be going through the selection process later this week, and then we'll go through the contracting process and we'll come to you probably in March or April, depending on how long that takes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
Ashley, one question, please.
Yeah.
You said if you need partners on this bicycle and pedestrian counters,
yeah.
You said 20%. What is that in dollars?
So the counters we're looking at are $2,500. So whatever 20% of that would be.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ashley. The next item is our City of Wichita had put together a great project of good regional significance, pursuing a grant application. So let me request Gary and his team to present. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Chad. I'm going to start it off and then I'm going to turn over to Brett Thomas with Garver. So we had started taking a look at the interchange of Kellogg and Eisenhower Airport Parkway, Kellogg and Ridge Road, right? Entrance to the airport, exit from the airport. Our goal initially was to look at aesthetic improvements. Right now, for people who are coming to Wichita, especially for the first time. It's not a real good look when you get to that interchange, right? So that was our goal. We just got started into that and a notice of funding opportunity for the RAISE grant came out. We started looking at the opportunities within the RAISE grant, which historically looks at surface transportation improvements and especially multimodal. So the predecessor to the RAISE grant was the BUILD grant. City of Wichita was successful in obtaining a $21 million BUILD grant for the North Junction that really helped close the funding gap. So we started looking at this a little bit closer and decided that we saw a lot of really cool opportunities. I don't want to get too far into it because I want Brent to talk about it, but one of the things I didn't even know myself is right now there is no transit service to and from the airport. That could be a big part of this, to look at opportunities for transit services. There's minimal bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. There's opportunities to look at the North Airport campus for development opportunities too. So we're working, it's been kind of a mad scramble. This application is due by February 28th. City Council just approved submitting it this morning. Brent's been on the speaking tour. The South Central Kansas Transportation Coalition supported it. There's probably a fair amount of you in this room who has heard from somebody on the team about a letter of support, because if ever there was a regionally significant project, we think this is probably it. We think there's a lot of opportunities to really make some changes here. The interchange itself is having a lot of functional issues from a safety perspective and efficiency perspective. Traffic counts are growing. There's a lot of issues with the infrastructure itself. So anyway, I'm about to go too far and take away from Brent. So the last thing I want to mention before I turn it over to Brent is this is a planning grant application for planning and design. We were requesting $3 million. That includes $2.4 million request for a federal grant, and it would be a $600,000 local match. We haven't necessarily determined exactly where the $600,000 comes from yet. We've earmarked some funding on the city side just as a placeholder, but this is not a request today, but I'm gonna take the liberty of throwing this out while I'm up here, that I kind of wonder on a project like this, again, with this much regional significance for Eisenhower National Airport, if there's a chance, if we were fortunate enough to be awarded this grant opportunity, if that $600,000 couldn't partially be funded through WAMPO in some fashion. So again, we're not asking for that today. I think it's just something maybe for a future discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brent.
All right. Thank you, Gary. As you mentioned, my name is Brent Thomas. I'm with Garver, and we're assisting the city in the preparation of the RAISE grant application. And as Gary mentioned, again, this is a planning grant. So the intent of this project or this grant request is to request funds to allow the city to study this area. It's generally the area defined here in blue. And that would be roughly centered down the Kellogg and the Eisenhower Airport Parkway corridors up to Maple, down towards the terminal, and then from approximately a quarter mile west of Eisenhower Parkway, east towards the floodway in the I-235 interchange. We also get up into the area along the Taft corridor, as well as along Pueblo and Hoover to the east, and then the Airport Road corridor through the central part of the original airport campus. One of the things that we are focusing on, or actually several aspects that we're focusing on, is the safety aspects of this interchange. Some of the graphics and some of the materials that we've started to pull together for the application includes significant accident rates in the Kellogg and Eisenhower Airport Parkway interchange. The interchange itself dates back to the early 1980s, and some of the other infrastructure, including on the airport campus, Airport Road, for example, Harry Street. Some of that dates back to the original airport construction back in the mid-50s. So one of the aspects of this is to look at improving aging infrastructure. And as Wichita has developed, again, when the airport was built, this was on the far western edge of the city. And as the city continues to go to the west, northwest, addressing the safety and the function of this interchange and this complex in the grand picture of the transportation network on the west side of the city. What's shown here in yellow are some of the significant areas of interchanges that will be part of the study. And again, we'll be looking at what kinds of geometric and just general function improvements can be done to make those intersections safer and function better than they do today. So that is everything from going up Eisenhower Airport Parkway to Taft, as that area continues to grow with more restaurant and other service businesses going into that area. It becomes quite congested, not only morning and PM peak, but also midday as well. Again, obviously the largest piece of this is going to be that Kellogg and Eisenhower Airport Parkway interchange. Once you get onto the airport campus, we'd be looking at the airport Parkway and Harry, as well as Crossfield. And then further east down the Kellogg corridor at Dugan. That area particularly down at Dugan to Pueblo and Hoover experiences a lot of backups and congestion issues during peak use times for Textron, as well as folks going to and from Bombardier. So again, as a part of the study that would look at how do we address some of those congestion issues. And again, in the bigger picture, that includes looking at issues with signalization, geometric layouts, things like that. One of the things that Gary did mention, connectivity is going to be a major component of it. Again, with the RAISE program, alternative modes of transportation is a very important aspect of this. Right now, the Prairie Sunset Trail does sort of bisect this planning area from west to east. The city has the current project under design that would take it would connect the Prairie Sunset Trail to downtown to the Delano area. What this project would look at is, what the study would look at is improvements to Prairie Sunset, but also how do we bridge the gap that is Kellogg right now? There's not a good connection from north to south or vice versa. So you have this major regional connection with the Prairie Sunset Trail. You have the Woodchuck Bike Boulevard, which is just behind Target on the north side of the interchange, and that kind of snakes through the neighborhoods of West Wichita to Sedgwick County Park. So how do we bridge that gap right now in the connectivity in that area? Original areas of the campus also lack adequate sidewalks, and particularly in this northern part of the campus. As this corridor continues to develop, you have the Hampton Inn at Harry and the Parkway. There's a new hotel that will be built north of that. That Ridge Road corridor was never built for that kind of development. It's asphalt mat, ditches on either side, no sidewalks. So again, as this area continues to transition, how can the city best outfit this area to accommodate that growth, as well as making it a safer area for not only pedestrians and cyclists, but also drivers as well. And then the last component is that transit element. Currently, Route 11 is the closest bus service in this area. And that comes down Maple, Julia, across on Taft, and then back up Ridge. So with that lack of connection to the airport terminal, we've heard from others and visiting with Mike Tan. We'll be meeting with the Transit Advisory Board tomorrow as well. That's one of the significant components of this planning grant. Again, is trying to encourage or develop alternative modes of transportation, not just those vehicular modes to this area. So working with transit as well as the airport authority on the development of this grant, looking at the best ways to make connections to the campus, and not only for employers and employees in the area, but also travelers to and from the airport as well. It's a lot of information, a little bit of time, but I'll kind of stop right there and then open it up for questions if anybody has any.
Thank you. Do we have questions? I don't see any right now. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Gary. That's a great project. WAMPO had completed writing letter of support for this project. And then, for the grant application, to win the grant application, it needs to demonstrate regional support as well. So it would be helpful if Gary and James Wagner also are compiling letters of support from the regional, since it serves many jurisdictions and all cities in our area, not only our region, but farmers far away from our Wichita as well, the entire South and Southwest as well. So if staff can help in helping you in any way in writing and completing the letters, we are there as well. That's that item. Okay, next item on my list is There's a small handout I have placed in each of your table area. Just want to share the meeting that I went to called Amtrak Long Distance Service Study that has a working group committee member. And then when I went to one of the meetings, they had shared some information that I would like to share with you as well. This will also help us in understanding, how our Heartland Flyer project is in relation with this long distance service study. Primarily, this study is required by Federal Railroad Administration, FRA, and they have first round of meetings and public engagement requesting public input by March 17th. So that's why I was quickly updating this for you, because next TPB meeting, it will be close to March 17th. So let me go through these few slides quickly. This slide on the screen, and as well as in your handouts, has the Federal Railroad Administration. They divided into several regions as working groups. You can see the blue is Midwest and green is Central. And then you can see Kansas is in both Midwest as well as in Central regions. And similarly, there are other states that are like Denver is in both Southwest as well as in Northwest. And then the next slide has when the meeting schedules are happening. Last week, there was one in Jackson, Mississippi, and then several meetings are happening. And the next slide has what is long distance routes, what is long distance study. They came up with a definition called anytime the route is greater than 750 miles, they have come up with that threshold for the long distance. And the next slide also has routes on the map. And then there's also a table in your handouts. This is all for information. One of the routes I would like to share with you is the Southwest Chief route that connects from Los Angeles all the way to Chicago. Just to give a perspective, what is 750 miles? Wichita to Chicago is about 600 miles. Dallas to Chicago would be 800 or plus so miles approximately. So therefore, Los Angeles to Chicago, that route passes through Kansas. That's one of the routes that is currently running by Amtrak. On the next page, the overall Amtrak routes, and then you can see how we also were thinking about Heartland Flyer that connects Newton, Wichita, Oklahoma City, and Dallas. There's also ridership data on the next slide that I can provide another page that is of a better font than this, but just to give a picture on what all is. The next slide has what are the state-supported routes, and in magenta there is a state supported route and long distance routes. And then you can clearly see how some of the states have Amtrak long distance routes and some states have only state maintained, like Oklahoma in blue. On the next slide, in Oklahoma blue, that is simply state supported route. Whereas Kansas is completely Amtrak supported route, and Texas is kind of both state as well as, and the reason is in the map that magenta route connects state supported both by TxDOT and Oklahoma DOT. Now quickly on what exactly is this long distance service study is in this slide that has, the new legislation, IIJA, also called as bill, requires Federal Railroad Administration to conduct a study to evaluate the restoration of daily intercity rail passenger service. Primarily, were there any routes that were discontinued in the past? They were going to study those, and then any routes that occur on a non-daily basis. So they identified and they shared with us what were some of the routes that were discontinued in the past. So that couple of those I would like to share with you. There was one pre-1971 that discontinued route that's called as San Francisco Chief Route that was there between 1954 and 1971. And they shared this. They also show, you can also see on this slide the overlap on some of the, like Southwest Chief has an overlap on this route. And then there's also rationale for discontinuing this on this slide as well. And then the next page also has what happened when this route was discontinued. How many of the cities were lost the service at that time? And then Wichita was one of them. There were many that were discontinued throughout the many states, both West Coast, East Coast and all, but I have just picked our region and our state, our region. So this will give a perspective for us when we are supporting Heartland Flyer. So that's why I wanted to share this with you. The next slide has what were some of the Amtrak discontinued routes. That is, and this map shows when it is discontinued. It was after 1971, like between 1974 and 1979, that route was existing. It's called Lone Star Route. You can see it's between Houston, Dallas, and then Wichita, Oklahoma City, and Wichita, and then Chicago. So one of the things that long distance study has, it looks favorable that Wichita area, because of the discontinued routes in the past, it's more favorable for this study as well. So the question is, Corey Davis at KDOT is making an effort on corridor ID program that also needed by Federal Railroad Administration. So I looked into what's the difference between Heartland Flyer and the long distance study. The difference between the corridor ID that KDOT and TxDOT and Oklahoma DOT are coordinating is the routes that are less than 750, routes that are less than 7,500 miles, 750 miles, route that are less than 750 miles. So the difference between long distance service and the corridor ID is the long distance service are looking at 750 miles, and then the corridor ID is looking at less than 750 miles. So that's, I just wanted to share that with you. And for the public comments, that's the website. They're going to update all this, what I discussed with you and what I shared with you. It's March 17th. And so any questions, happy to answer.
Thanks, Chad. I guess I have a question. Public comments are due fairly soon by March 17th. And I guess a lot of people are supporting this Amtrak extension through Wichita. What do we need to do? I know the Transportation Coalition is in favor of it. WAMPO says that they're in favor of it. Sedgwick County and Wichita is in favor of it. What else do we have to do in order to get these public comments, or is there some additional things that we have to do for the public comments to make sure that our voices are heard?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. One of the things I learned was how this proposed route of Heartland Flyer serves colleges and universities along the route, like Wichita State University and universities in Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Norman, and Dallas, as well as towards Kansas City, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, how students and families can use this route and how it serves them. And the other thing that we can provide in the public comments is how this route serves Wichita, being the base for for national security. And so that type of comments, as well as because there was some routes discontinued in the past restoration, these were some of the comments that would be conducive and helpful as far as I learned from this.
Okay, well, for example, Wichita State University provides in-state tuition to everybody up and down the I-35 corridor. And so one way of getting those students from Dallas and other places up to WSU is they can take the Amtrak. So are these the type of comments that we need to make sure that are put in there? And if so, who is responsible for getting those in there?
I think many of us can put comments from as many as possible. WAMPO staff will do their part, and more the comments better, I think.
Okay. Brent, do you know if the coalition's putting something together? Okay.
And we are mentioning universities as well.
Good. All right. I just want to make sure those kind of comments are going forward because they're important. All right, Chad, anything else on that? Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, Chad, just to clarify, the comments are to be put on this website that you've listed here. Is that correct?
Yes, Mayor, that website they're updating in a week or 10 days. They're updating all the public engagement they're gathering, both West Coast, East Coast, North, South, everywhere.
Very good. Any other questions? Seeing none, thanks for the report. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll go on to consent agenda, and Kelly Rundell has been doing a number of things here recently. So do you want to brief the TPB on the 3 different policies that you've been working on?
Okay, the first of these is a procurement policy, a purchasing policy. This is a standalone policy that we're not having in the operations manual. Originally, we did have it in our operations manual. KDOT had recommended that we make a standalone policy. So the WAMPO staff's been working with KDOT to develop this policy. The description that they have here is pretty accurate. We've kept kind of the same guidelines as far as dollar limits to when we go to different steps of the process. But the idea was to make it easier to use and again, make it standalone so we can hand that out to people who are asking how we do things or how we can buy things. It also does include the relationship WAMPO has with Sedgwick County to procure computers and things that are in connection with this building. Because we want to make sure our computer systems is compatible with what's already in the building. So there is that kind of exception in there, and that would allow, this policy does allow them to, WAMPO to purchase things through the Sedgwick County's large purchases to get their computers and things that are compatible. So that's the first thing on the policy, on the first item. Do you want to hear them all at once?
Yeah, we're going to take consent all at once.
Okay. The next item is the operations manual, which is also the employees manual. As I said, we've taken out the purchasing policy out of there. We've added 2 new policies, actually revised policies. The first one is the travel policy, talks about going to conventions and conferences and traveling for work outside of the area that is the WAMPO district. And this policy really makes things much cleaner. It's easier to follow, makes it more clear when you have permission to do things like that. It also substitutes submitting expenses for a per diem allowance for out of town. They're using the federal DOT standards for reimbursement. So if Chad has to go to Washington, DC or something like that, then the standards for his per diem will be whatever the federal DOT has on that kind of case. And again, this also is in cooperation with KDOT, which reviews our expenses for these kind of matters anyway. The other part of that employee manual is a technology replacement policy. This has to do with the computers as they become obsolete, to set up a time frame on when we're going to replace them. And I'm sure all of your governments have a policy like that. That's kind of a straightforward type thing. These are really just clarifications of things that were already in the manual to make them a little bit clearer and more precise what we're going to do. The third thing is the emergency operations plan. This is also not in the operations manual, the employee manual. This is what you do in the event of a fire or a tornado or bomb threats or whatever kind of things can happen in this meeting, in this building, and advise employees on how to respond to those when they talk to the county about things going on in the building and things like that. I've reviewed those. That's been an internal product, so it doesn't go to KDOT or anything, but it's very, very straightforward as you would have for any type of operational business. Any questions?
Yeah, again, the executive committee reviewed all these with Kelly here just recently, and we believe that these are needed. Does anyone have any questions before we vote on it?
Yes, I have one question, or a couple of comments and a question. The policy and emergency management had the defibrillator and AED, and I think those are probably one and the same in most applications, and maybe just a consistency there. And then oftentimes it lists 911, and the WAMPO has a 6911, and I know why they have that different number. But it's not consistent throughout the policy to call 6911 if you're at a WAMPO phone.
We can certainly clarify those things,
And-
making it consistent.
And then lastly, and this is really just because you're the attorney, okay? And just really a question for you. There's a statement under medical emergency that says after treatment, if the injury or illness was a result of your job in the workplace, speak with your supervisor and HR assistant about eligibility for workers' compensation. My experience, that's a dangerous thing to say in a policy. Any injury on the job should be reported regardless whether you think it's work related or not. And that's the way I've always operated as manager, and that's the way I've always seen businesses operate. So I just wonder if maybe that shouldn't be reworded.
Yeah, that would be fine. We can certainly change that if you're injured when you think it's on the job. I mean, I think we don't want to find out about somebody had a car wreck over the weekend or something like that. So we would hope they use a little bit of judgment on that, but sure, we can clarify those things also.
Thank you.
I'm glad you read that very thoroughly.
Very good. Any other questions? Seeing none, we do have a couple of adjustments we need to make to it, but I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda with adjustments that were identified by the mayor.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Both same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks for reviewing those, and we'll make the changes and then get those published. Thank you. I appreciate it. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Is anyone in the audience here locally, first of all, wish to speak during the public comments? I don't see anyone. Is there anyone online wish to speak for public comments? I don't see anyone there. And we'll go on to the next item, and we do have some action. Before we get into electing chair and vice chair and the TAC chair, I just want to tell you how humble and grateful I was to be able to serve this community for the last 2 years as your chair. I thank you for the trust that you've given in the leadership. But there's a lot of people that have made this happen. It wasn't just me. First of all, I want to go back one, and Dan Wojciak is in the audience today. And he was the previous chair. And one of the things that I worried about was as you transition, you lose the knowledge of what's happening. And you'll remember we did change the way that we elect people to serve on different committees. And we kept Dan on the executive committee for a reason, because we don't want to lose that corporate knowledge. And he led us through some tough times. In addition, he led us through the hiring of Chad. And so there are some things that He has had a lasting impact on this organization, and I want to thank Dan very much for his service. Mayor Bert Usry is not in the audience today. He sent me an email that he can't attend. But a year or so ago, we needed somebody to take over TAC. And we asked the mayor if he would take over TAC, and he did. And then he recently told us that he's thinking of transitioning to civilian life. And as a result of that, we need to make sure that we have continuity. And so the executive committee discussed who might take over TAC, because that's a critical position. And Mayor Russ Kessler has agreed to do that, and I want to thank him. Hopefully here in a little bit, we'll elect him officially. So he's been transitioning actually with Mayor Usry for the last several months. So I want to thank both of those mayors for their service to this organization. The chair doesn't do everything. The vice chair is really a strong supporter of what happens in this organization. And I sincerely thank Becky Tuttle, as when she and I took over 2 years ago, we were $500,000 in debt. We had some personnel issues. We had a number of things that were going on. Becky and I'm sorry, Councilwoman Tuttle, I'd probably be formal. She and I met with Chad monthly, and even at times more often than that, because we had to move through some tough times and make some hard decisions. We had some personnel issues here in this organization. We had some people that were way overpaid, and it was draining our resources. We had to make some tough decisions. And as a team, we made those decisions. So thank you to Becky. I appreciate it. Troy is not here today, and I don't know if he's even online because he said his internet's not working very well. But he worked with TAC for some time, and we appreciate that very much. So he's been an integral part of what we've done. Dan was chairing this organization when we hired Chad. And we've seen the change in the last 2.5 years that Chad has been here. And his leadership is part of that. He sees this each and every day. We see this once a month or with the executive committee a little more frequently than that, and with Councilwoman Tuttle and I even more frequently. But his leadership has made a difference in this organization, and I want to thank Chad. We've also had a number of legal challenges in the past. And we couldn't have worked through those legal challenges without Kelly Rundell serving as our legal counsel. And we've relied on her over and over again in the last couple of years. And I thank her for her service. The WAMPO staff has turned over a tremendous number of people in the last couple of years. And Chad has built a team that is fantastic right now. We may add a few more here in the future, but right now it's probably the best WAMPO staff that I've seen since I've been here in about 6 years. And so I want to thank each and every one of the WAMPO staff. Now, where do we get our money? We get our money from KDOT and the Federal Highway Administration. And we identify different projects, but without their support, and getting the funding that we need in order to be able to provide those services to our communities, we wouldn't be able to accomplish what this organization has accomplished in the last several years. So again, thank you to both KDOT and the Federal Highway Administration for your support. So as we go forward, there's going to be a couple more challenges that we need to take a look at. We've just saw this big, huge Apex grant that was came to this area. It's going to create 2,000 jobs, over 1 million square foot facility. And I guarantee you there's going to be transportation challenges to get to that location, to get the people in and out, to move the goods in and out. And so this is something we have to look at for the future as well. What different programs and projects are going to happen in this community like Integra, and that's a critical one. That's one we really have to start focusing on. What are we going to have to focus on in the future? So it's going to require all of you to keep your ear to the ground and the leadership to take a look at this and make sure that we can follow through with the needs, what needs to happen. Again, I thank everyone. But one of the things, most of you know that my background's military. I spent 29 years doing things, but in the military, succession planning is critical. And I've always believed in succession planning. And so as I've looked at since being involved as the vice chair and the chair, I wanted to make sure that we can keep the momentum moving forward. And you do that with making sure that you have a succession plan in place. And so I've kind of been grooming some people in order to be able to do this. One of the succession plans is to put Mayor Kessler in a position to run TAC permanently. Another succession plan that I've tried to put in place is to make sure that Councilwoman Tuttle is ready to take over as the chair. And so I hope you all agree with me that these are wise decisions as we move forward, because the way that I'm going to present this actually, and I'll start at TAC and move forward. And one other person is Troy Tabor, has served a great deal of time and effort on the TAC in the past. And I think it's time for him to move up so that he can be part of the succession plan of the future. So I'm going to kind of do this in backwards. As I want to start with the TAC chair. And I know that Mayor Kessler has agreed to take over, but I hope you all agree that that's the right person. We've been grooming him for this job here for the past several months. So I make a motion that we appoint Mayor Russ Kessler as the TAC chair.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Thank you. I appreciate that. I see no discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Congratulations, Mr. Mayor. We appreciate it.
I appreciate the confidence you've put in me, and I definitely look forward to the challenge. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Now we move up to the vice chair. And again, I mentioned Troy Tabor. He can't be here today, but he has done a fantastic job serving on this organization. And I think if we're looking for the future, we need someone like that in 2 years to take over as chair, because that's the direction I think we ought to be heading. I make a motion that we appoint Troy Tabor as the vice chair.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. I appreciate that decision. And finally, and most important, is the chair. And again, Becky Tuttle has been an outstanding vice chair. She is a cheerleader for WAMPO. Anyone in Wichita knows that she does a WAMPO dance every time that we have a
Maybe cheer now today.
TPB meeting. And that's what we need, because this organization I am very passionate about, because it lets smaller cities and communities get the resources that they need to do projects that they couldn't afford otherwise. So we have to make sure we keep leadership in place that looks at that broad picture, even though, Sedgwick County and Wichita are the 900-pound gorillas, and we know that. Okay, but we also have to recognize that we have to take care of this entire area, and that's what WAMPO does. And so they provide the goods and services that these smaller communities couldn't afford to do. So with that, I make a motion that we appoint Councilwoman Becky Tuttle as the chair.
Second.
We have a motion in 3 or 4 seconds. Thank you. Any comments? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. At this time, Becky Tuttle is the new chair. I'm going to step over to her position, and she's going to take over the meeting. Thank you.
We're changing shoes too. Yeah, the WAMPO dance. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to all the mentoring from Chairman Dennis. Can we give him a round of applause, please? Outstanding service. I told him that I could not and would not want to do this without his continued mentorship. So he's not going very far away. We're just switching seats, but we definitely will be continuing the teamwork. And Troy and I have also talked and met, and we're excited to serve together and promise to always make sure that we're keeping WAMPO regionally significant. Also going to make sure that we collaborate significantly with the South Central Kansas Transportation Coalition. So looking for this opportunity to serve this year. So thank you to staff and thank you for all of your trust. With that, we will continue with the rest of the agenda. So the next action item is 4B for TIP Amendment 2, and I'll turn it over to Ashley and then Nick with additional questions.
Right, thank you. So the 4-year Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, is the short-range implementation of the long-range transportation plan, the MTP, which is currently MTP 2040, but we're going to be developing the 2051 here soon. And it was originally developed last year and it was approved in August, and we do amendments as needed. And so this is our second amendment that we needed to do. We had a public review and comment schedule shown here, and then TAC reviewed this at their January meeting, and now we're here today. The TIP amendment can be found online, and there are 12 projects in this amendment, and one of them is a new project. And then we have 3 requests for projects to be removed and 8 projects that needed to be modified in the TIP. In addition, we're giving notice to TAC and TPP that there were 54 projects that needed to have administrative adjustments, which were mainly just adjustments to the contacts and very small, tiny adjustments. So this map shows the projects. The ones in red are part of Amendment 2. The ones in blue are part of Administrative Adjustment 1.1 and 1.2. And there are a couple of projects that are not mappable. So the new project that's being added in is an ITS project from KDOT. And then 3 projects that WAMPO will be removing were not mappable. And we'll talk about those a little bit later. So this table shows what all the formal actions were in this TIP amendment. I'll go through them really quickly. The City of Garden Plain had an increase in KDOT allocated TA funding. So that's not WAMPO TA funding, but KDOT TA funding. The City of Valley Center had an increase in WAMPO suballocated STBG and TA. Pawnee and 127th Street intersection had an increase in all the cost estimates, moved all projects phases to later years. West Street, Harry to Pawnee had an increase in all of WAMPO's suballocated funding categories and shifted between funding and adjusted some advanced construction conversion. The Zoo Boulevard Bridge had an increase in STBG funding. Then there's a few more. The North Junction project had an increase in costs, including NHPP and changing advanced construction conversion to a direct payment. Installing fiber along US 54 had an increase in costs, and it was also moved back to 2023. The new ITS project is listed here from KDOT. Then right-of-way for the Northwest bypass had an increase in costs, added preliminary engineering, and adjusted right-of-way. So it was all in 2023 rather than spread across 4 years. And then we have our WAMPO projects that we're removing. So the first 2 listed there, we just realized we didn't need at this moment. And the last one, we instead decided to use CPG funding in our UPWP to pay for this MTP 2050 Planning Assistance Project. So that way we didn't have to wait for the federal fiscal year 24 funds to become active in October. So we could get a head start. I don't know what's happening. Okay. So this table just shows all the changes in the local, state, and federal funding categories. So you can see all the changes there. And this shows the formal action that we're taking with this amendment. Now, the first 3 projects that are listed here should be familiar because we talked about them in, I think it was December, when we discussed the end of year balance policy. I think I had a longer name, but so this is the action to actually make it formal, where we discussed what we would want to do back in December. So the West Street Harry to Pawnee has over $1 million added to it. Zoo Bridge Boulevard Bridge has 189,000. Meridian has 886,000, and they're removing those three WAMPO projects. And this table shows the administrative adjustments that don't require formal action, but we are including them here so you see them. We also included a table in the packet which shows all of the WAMPO suballocated funding and the projects across all 4 years, and is also online. This was something that was requested at TAC, and so we'll be updating that so you can all see the full picture of the funding. So this TIP amendment continues to meet all the federal requirements. We had the 15-day public comment period, which is required in our public participation plan. And we received one comment. It was actually from KDOT, so not a public comment necessarily. And it was just about changing a number. So we adjusted that and re-uploaded everything to the website on January 9th, which was at the very beginning of the public comment period. And the amendment is consistent with the current MTP, and it is fiscally constrained, which those are both federal requirements. And this adds $31.5 million to the overall program. So the action options are to approve as presented, not approve, approve with specific changes, and TAC recommended approving as presented.
Thank you, Ashley. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, seeing none, if this is approved, it will be sent to KDOT to be included in the State Transportation Improvement Program for review and consideration by the Federal Highway Administration and also the Federal Transit Administration. We would expect that in March of 2023. So with that, I would make a motion to approve the amendment as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? The item does pass. Thank you, Ashley, for your presentation. Next, we'll go to the next part of the agenda, which is discussion and updates. And again, it's Ashley with the TIP reasonable progress policy.
Yes, thank you. We have a reasonable progress policy that's currently in our TIP. It is in an appendix. And there are two primary provisions. The first one is to do bi-monthly progress reports on projects that have federal funding for the current fiscal year or have received funding from past years but have not finished. And then the second one is bullet, part of that is if there's project is not obligated by March 31st, then the TPB has the option to pull the WAMPO suballocated funding. So we are looking at ways to adjust this because that seems very stringent. So we talked to TAC twice and to KDOT, and we're presenting this for more discussion from you all. What we're thinking of doing is resuming the bi-monthly progress reports, because that would be good for everyone to know where we're at with our funding. But then removing the requirement that projects must obligate by March 31st. Instead, we're looking at changing it to May 31st and using it as a check-in rather than a hard deadline. But we are also knowing that we need to think about if we want to add some thresholds to that. So not exactly sure what, but like if you get super close to obligating by March 31st, then you can move on. If you're, or I'm sorry, May 31st, you can move on. If you're not, then we have to have more discussions. So that's something that staff is thinking about now. Now, Nick will talk about some next steps, and then we'd love to have your input on this.
Thank you. The next steps are pretty simple. If this body has any input on how we should further adjust the reasonable progress policy or not adjust as the case may be, we will address that. And then whatever we finally come up with will be included in the next regular TIP amendment, which will have its public comment period March 11th through 26th. Attack recommendation on March 27th and voted on by this body on April 11th, 2023, along with whatever other TIP amendments that come up at that time on projects.
Any questions for Ashley or Nick? Seeing none, We don't have to move to file or anything. Okay, then we will go on to the next discussion item, which is the carbon reduction program process. So again, Ashley and Nick.
Yes. All right. So on or in November of 2021, when the bipartisan infrastructure law was enacted, it developed a new funding program called the Carbon Reduction Program, or CRP, which can be used to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And this is the fourth suballocated funding program that WAMPO has. So we have STBG, CMAQ, TA, and now CRP. We will have about 1.2 million of CRP funds per year through 2022 to 2026. Due to some delays in federal guidance, we are grouping 3 years of funding together. So we're going to do 22, 23, and 24, which equals about 3.6 million in a call for projects. KDOT has requested that these projects get included in the TIP and then into the STIP by November of 2023. And now Nick will talk about that.
Thank you, Ashley. Oh, as with any other call for projects, when it goes to the project selection committee to provide a recommendation to the TAC and and then to the TPB for which projects to give this funding to, WAMPO staff will provide non-binding scores for those projects by which they may be used to be ranked, but again, non-binding, based on criteria that were established on October 12th, 2021 by the TPB. However, in addition to that, we need some additional information is needed for this new funding program that we are going to request in the questionnaire that will be distributed along with the call for projects. Because this program has some requirements for project eligibility that it does not have in common with all of the other suballocated funding programs that we currently have. And so more specifically, it is focused on reducing carbon dioxide emissions, specifically carbon dioxide, not any other greenhouse gas. And the federal guidance lists specific activities that may qualify for CRP funds. And so we ask about projects that meet any of those criteria. But then if a project does not meet one of those categories, it may still qualify for CRP funding if over its life cycle, it would reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and you have the calculations to prove it, and that those calculations could be provided to the federal government as proof of eligibility. And so we ask a question about those calculations, and it is strongly advised that such calculations be provided even if your project meets one of the categories that qualifies without such calculations. It'll make things much easier and to judge it that way. And a quick note, there is one of the checkboxes in the questionnaire that has been provided in your packet that we are going to remove for the final version, that being the one that reads development of a carbon reduction strategy. Now, that part of the federal guidance referred specifically to the state carbon reduction strategy that KDOT would work on, so that would not apply down at our level. So just letting you know about that. And let's see, and at the next TAC meeting later this month, there will be they will have a chance to look at the questionnaire as well, and to provide, and if they have any thoughts on it before that meeting, to express them before we officially open the call for projects. Okay. So a quick rundown of the timeline. On February 27th, this month, we'll present the call for projects questionnaire to the TAC as just discussed. Then if they don't have any further changes, or if they have only minor changes to suggest for that, then we would open the call for projects on March 1st, close it on May 1st. So that's 2 months to get your information in for projects that you want to funded with this money. And then in June of this year, the project selection committee would meet and provide the recommendations to the TAC to make their recommendation on July 24th. The TPB would then vote on which projects would be approved for funding on August 8th. Where do I go? Then in September, there'd be the public comment period for the TIP amendment to make that official once. And then on the September 25th, TAC recommendation on the TIP amendment number 5, i.e. So we have the 3 amendments after the one that was just approved here. And then on October 10th, the TPB would vote on the TIP amendment. And then in November 23, it would be incorporated into the STIP. And in that same month, actually, KDOT is expected to complete their carbon reduction strategy. And that hence the reason that we were aiming for that particular month of this. And I apologize for not getting November of 2023 in there. And then in late 2023, early 2024, we will have the project selection process for both the Metropolitan Transportation Plan for 2050 MTP and the next full TIP cycle for 2025 to 2028. And the selection of CRP funds for the last 2 years under the BIL would also be included under that. So that would be the funds distributed for 25 and 26. So this current call for projects is for funds that would obligate no later than the end of federal fiscal year 2025. And then that second round for the last 2 years, which would be about $2.4 million, most likely, would be in for projects obligating no later than 2026. And then as of that point, the CRP program would be brought up to date with all of our other sub-allocated funding programs.
Any questions for staff? Yes.
Thank you. I guess my one question is, we've got a lot of different programs, projects that we've already got set up in our MTP today. And some of those may actually be able to be used for the carbon reduction, which is special funding. The one I was thinking of off the top of my head is Maple Street, putting a sidewalk down Maple out west and then over to the Goddard School District on 167th so the kids can walk. That reduces the parents having to drive them to school, and it also makes it a little more safer. So are we going to scrub the things that we've already got in our plan today and see if some of those can be moved over and use as special funding? And that way we can use the money that's in our plan today for other things that might be more important.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's an excellent question. And the project selection committee, when the committee meets in June, definitely that is one of the considerations they would have, because they were already prioritized in the past, like bike paths and trails and the sidewalks at the Maple Street on the Goddard and county border. So yes, Mr. Chair, that would be prioritized by will be discussed with project selection committee again.
Any other questions? this is a project we talked about even internally already. I know we spent some time at executive committee talking about it last week. I had the pleasure of going with some of my colleagues from the city and also the South Central Kansas Transportation Coalition. And we spoke with interim transportation secretary Calvin Reed, and we talked about this specific project, and he's excited to see what's going to come forward. So what's the date that the call for projects comes out?
March 1st.
March 1st. Next, probably most important date, when are the call for projects due?
May 1st.
May 1st. So mark your calendars, get with your staff, see if there's something you think might qualify. Excited to see what happens next. Thank you, Ashley and Nick, for your presentation. Yes, please.
Madam Chair, I apologize, Mr. Vice Chair, and Madam Chair, I should have addressed, so that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, we have electric vehicles with Tammy Alexander with KDOT. Welcome.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to give an overview here about what's going on at KDOT, what we have planned for the federal funding that we received through the bipartisan infrastructure law to roll out those EV charging stations. So just a little bit of housekeeping when we're talking terminology, and apologize any of you that were at the TAC meeting. Some of this is a repeat, but when we're talking about a station location, that's going to be an individual address. Sometimes you've heard about a charging station being referred to as an individual charger, which would be analogous to an individual gas pump. But when we're talking about a station, we're talking about one address. There might be multiple chargers at a location. That will be the requirement under the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan, or NEVI funding, that we have multiple chargers. We have to have these stations every 50 miles along alternative fuel corridors. And I'll get a little more into that as we go on through this presentation. An individual charger might have multiple charging ports on it. They have chargers with 2 ports on them. That means it can charge 2 vehicles at a time. An individual port might have multiple connectors. So there might be different types of connectors on one port, but you can still only charge 1 vehicle per port. So just a little bit of clarification there. Just some information on the charging technology so that you're all familiar. The NEVI funding requires that DC fast charging along the highways. So that's going to be the type of similar to a gas station experience. You're going to pull in, you're going to charge your car in 15 to 30 minutes, depending on your state of charge, the type of vehicle that you have, et cetera. There's also level 2 charging, which is going to be similar to what you would have as a dryer plug or an electric stove, that 240 volt charging. People can have those often in their homes, or workplace charging, public charging that you would have around the community. That's usually level 2 charging. And then level 1, you can charge a vehicle. I'm not sure many people know this, but off of any outlet. Same thing that you would run a blow dryer or a power drill. You can charge your vehicle just a little bit more slowly. So Kansas was allocated $39.5 million through the NEVI formula funding process to roll out electric vehicle charging stations over the next 5 years. Initially, that funding is limited to the alternative fuel corridors for EV charging. We have to build those corridors fully out with those stations every 50 miles within 1 mile of the corridor. And they have to have 4 ports capable of 150 kilowatt charging or more. And they have to each have CCS connectors. It's a certain kind of connector that is becoming the US standard apart from Tesla. Our plan was approved as part of the initial state plans that were approved in mid-September, which we were very proud about that. What I will say is this plan is not a comprehensive state plan for EV charging. We do know that there's additional charging needed around the state off of these alternative fuel corridors. We need things like community charging, charging for multi-unit housing, et cetera. So this is not a comprehensive state plan. We have more work to do, and we realize that. But this is a guide for how are we going to get started? How are we going to work on filling out those corridors and get started in the electric vehicle revolution? We do have to do annual updates to access the next year of funding. And we haven't heard when that's going to be due yet, but we anticipate it's going to be late summer, early fall, like our plan was due last year. But those updates are a great thing because that's going to allow us to make adjustments as needed to look where charging's been installed, where growth in electric vehicles is occurring, and what we may need to change or do a little differently in the next year's plan. So approval of our plan last fall gave us access to the first 2 years of funding, which is 14.2 million. Later this month, probably more early next month, we're going to do a request for interest for that NEVI funding, those first 2 years of funds. Later in the spring, then we'll do our request for projects. And then, as I said, we'll have a plan update due later in the fall. That we'll have to require to access the next year's funding. We'll get about 8.4 million for years 23, 24, and 24, 25, and 26. That's a typo there. That we'll be able to put additional EV charging out within the state. After we do get those corridors built out, we are allowed to move that funding to community charging. And so that gives us a little more flexibility. So we're going to work really hard to try and get that done quickly and be able to move that funding to the other areas of the state that we know need charging. And like many of the federal plans, we do have that Justice 40 initiative requirement, which requires 40% of the funding be spent to benefit disadvantaged communities. For electric vehicle charging, that's expanded somewhat to include areas that just don't have access to it. So a lot of our rural communities will be able to be included with that. So look at where we are right now. This is the dotted lines there are the alternative fuel EV charging corridors that have been designated by federal highway around the state. The only section that's considered complete is that green section there. It's behind the the name there, but it's between Topeka and Kansas City. That's the section that's complete. We have adequate charging, although we are in need of upgrading some of those charging stations to meet the new NEVI requirements. Those purple dots, those are the 5 NEVI compliant stations that we have around the state. So you can see we have a lot of work to do to get that charging every 50 miles. So a little bit better look at where we're at in the state. You can see on here, there are some additional that kind of blue-green color. Those are additional DC fast charging locations that we have around the state of Kansas. They just don't meet that NEVI requirement. So those stations will need to be upgraded to the new requirements in order to meet that. We have some of those red dots that are stations that were funded primarily with the Volkswagen settlement funding to build EV charging. So some of those stations are under construction right now. Matter of fact, the one just south of Wichita at the Turnpike, the Belle Plaine Turnpike service area just opened last week. So that one it's now a blue, it's right open. The one in Oakley should be open here within the next few weeks. So we're making progress. A look at what we're going to focus on for those first few rounds of funding. These sections here highlighted in red are where we need to add additional charging stations. So these are going to be the priority areas throughout Kansas where we're going to focus that money to try and get these corridors built out as quickly as possible. An up close look here at Wichita. Even though we only need to have the stations every 50 miles, Wichita is a big city. If you're just coming here to the airport, you don't want to drive clear across town, probably to Town East to charge your vehicle where that NEVI compliant station is. So we're going to try and get the NEVI compliant charging stations just as you're coming into or leaving town to make it easy access for travelers. So we're going to start that priority area at 235 at the 235 intersection with US 400 and to the west, and then on the east side of town at the 96 junction and to the east. And then all of 135 then will need it is a priority area because that town east location on the east side of town, it's further than a mile away. So in addition to the NEVI funding, there's other funding out there to support EV charging. So if you're not looking at those corridor stations, or you want to access the funding before we get to that built out area, there's the discretionary competitive grant funding that we assume will be announced almost any day. We're just waiting for that to come out, where cities, states, communities, et cetera, can apply to put EV charging in areas that fit better with their community that may not be corridor charging. The carbon reduction program, in addition to the funding that WAMPO has for carbon reduction, the state of Kansas has some funding for carbon reduction that will have EV charging eligibilities. And then there's other funding opportunities out there for various things to support electric vehicles and charging. The clean school bus funding. There's funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law for fleet transitions, grid accommodations to upgrade the grids as necessary, the electrical grid as necessary in order to be able to support EV charging. So there's a lot of options out there. This is just a quick look. It's a graph of just the U.S. Department of Transportation opportunities for EV charging. That first column there shows all the opportunities out there. There's other departments at the federal level that can also support funding for EV charging, economic development, rural development, et cetera. So lots of opportunities out there if you're interested in EV charging. And definitely encourage, if you're from one of those smaller communities, if you're looking at EV charging, look at where you're interested in putting it, talk with your utility, find out if that's going to be a good location, if they have the adequate power availability in the grid at that area, or if it could be upgraded with minor upgrades, identify a rate structure. That's a definite concern when we're talking about EV charging, not as much with level 2, but with these high power DC fast charging stations can be a real draw on the grid. And so you want to look at your rate structure there, research your equipment options, and think about the various locations. EVs sometimes need a little bit longer to charge if you're not using DC fast charging, so they're going to be parking longer. You want to try and locate where they're closer to the power, so you don't have to run it as far. Make it a much more affordable project if possible. And then think about the amenities that are nearby. Do you have a park? Do you have restaurants, access to facilities such as restrooms, et cetera? Other types of things that EV drivers may be looking for as they're looking to charge their vehicles. And then definitely research your funding opportunities. As I said, there's lots of them out there. This is a great time to be looking at building out EV charging because there is a lot of funding available. So this is just a few links here, and Ashley has these slides. If you want to have them, they're good information on various types of funding, background on EV charging, et cetera. I will say the proposed rulemaking and those minimum standards that for the NEVI funded stations, we are still waiting on that final rule from Federal Highways. And so that's going to, until we have that, we're kind of in a holding pattern of being able to move forward and put that funding out there. So, and with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Tammy. Any questions? Yes.
Operated by the government or own station?
No, KDOT does not plan to own and operate these stations at all. We will pass this funding on to communities, private entities, et cetera, that want to operate these stations, but we don't want to get in the business of being fuel providers. So.
Yes, Commissioner.
Real quickly, I've never used one of these. So do you use a credit card? You pay by the kilowatt hour? Or how does it work when you pull up to one?
The proposed guidelines recommended that all the chargers have credit card access. Whether that will make it to the final guidance, we don't know, but we anticipate likely so. So it's going to be similar to the pay at the pump experience at the gas station. There's also an option if you are part of a EV charging network. You can use an app on your phone or in your car to connect, and you can pay through that way.
Interesting. Good question. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Tammy. We
Great.
appreciate
Thank
your
you for having me.
presentation. Thank you for the information. Yes, Ashley.
Just one quick thing. So WAMPO will be working on an EV plan. Dora will be leading that effort, and so she'll be speaking about that in the future. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Ashley. Next on the agenda is the Mays Economic Development updates. So Richard and Jolene are going to wow us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief because we run over our hour, so we'll do better.
We have Valentine dates tonight, right?
But I do digress, having had the opportunity to deal with WAMPO for a number of years. I believe I'm the senior administrator anywhere in the region, perhaps the state, at 23 years. But I remember coming to WAMPO when it was in the old site and going through the process and attempting to get it. It was very unorganized and confusing, specifically for a small community that didn't have the staff to walk through it. But I compliment the leaders, of course, all of the current people that are on the board and those that have been serving before for where we're at today. It's a true partnership now. Everyone has a voice, everyone has an opportunity. And so on the part of B, having been involved in it in our particular city, I compliment all of the policy board and those that came before you to get it where we are today. So thank you for that. So having said that, I'll be brief. Today, there's a lot of good things happening in Mays. And of course, I owe it all to my number one partner, Jolene. She usually listens to what I recommend, but she refused to get up there and speak. So that's just the way it works at our office. We went through a good year last year, but we will also face the same problems that all of you, the inflation, the lack of materials, the inability to perhaps get the quality construction people that we wanted, but we were very blessed. A year ago, we have a very positive mayor and council, very visionary. They are very supportive of who we are in terms of employees. And so as a result of that, we've had a very successful year. One of the things that we have learned and that you all know, what's good for Mays is good for the region and it's good for the economic development. And we're all dependent on the traffic way, the communications, the ability to move economic development, whether it's in Mays, whether it's in Derby, whether it's in Andover, Wichita, wherever it happens to be. So by saying that, I want to personally thank all of the partners that we've had, our county partners, City of Wichita, Trans-Systems, Garver, KDOT, and of course, Chad, you and your staff have been great to work with, so we appreciate it. So what we're going to do now is show a brief video. And at the end of the video, if you have questions, if they're hard ones, direct them to Jolene. If they're not, give them to me and I'll take care of them. Thank you. A year ago, the Kansas Government Journal named Mays the fastest growing city in the state. Mays grew more than 67% between 2010 and 2020.
Something's going on with the going back and forth.
A year ago, the Kansas Government Journal named Mays the fastest growing city in the state. Mays grew more than 67% between 2010 and 2020. With 16 active housing additions, Mays currently has over 1,900 residential lots for the development pipeline.
Critical improvements to our water and wastewater systems to meet growth are underway. The final phase of our wastewater treatment plant expansion will double our capacity to 1 million gallons per day. Installation of a second water tower and a third well will be necessary for redundancy and increasing fire protection. Academy Avenue is more than just a street project. It showcases transportation design that embraces its connection with the community. With funding provided through WAMPO and KDOT, the project is shown here at the end of the summer. As you can see, in the past several months, significant progress has been made by Pearson Construction really bringing the vision of the designers at PEC to life. It features a 10-foot continuous bike and pedestrian path along the south and an 8-foot path on the north. Curvilinear features wind throughout with bands of colored pavement and blue pavers. New pedestrian lighting, as you see here, has been installed, and LED uplighting will reflect on the walls at night. Speaking of those winding curved walls, won't they be ideal for watching the parades down Academy? They create natural pause points for future art installations or benches. Completion of the Academy Avenue project is scheduled for March 1st, with the exception of landscape plantings, which will occur in the warmer spring months. Here you can see the final work on the plaza area at the park with benches and a new ADA accessible ramp to the park. Academy Avenue is more than just a street project. The unique elements encourage activation of a community center in the heart of Mays. Thank you to our partners at WAMPO, KDOT, PEC, and Pearson Construction. We hope that our Academy Avenue project is a point of pride for you as much as it is for us.
Our new amphitheater is the center showcase for our city park. It was a vision of Claire Donnelly, our former mayor, who had the plan to put it together. It was designed in 2020 by PEC, and the construction was completed last year by Donlinger. As indicated, there are currently 16 housing additions, which represent 1,900 structures and 2,400 dwelling units. The ones here that you're looking at are 3 of the 5 construction areas on 119th Street that are coming to the north. In addition to that, we will be installing a new sewer main with the cooperation of the city of Wichita. In 2005, an agreement between Mays and Wichita was made because there are certain areas that's more efficient and more economical to allow Wichita to provide the utility service in that area. We appreciate the cooperation with Wichita and its partnership and NOWAC, who will be doing the construction. Mays Industrial Park opened in 2014. It's located with about 120 acres northwest of 119th and 53rd Street North. It is currently fully occupied with 8 manufacturing businesses representing plastics, aircraft, automotive greases, construction, biotechnology, and others. The Hutton property located to the west is another 80 acres of undeveloped land yet to be, with an additional 80 acres that will be forthcoming in the very near future. Our Sedgwick County partners are helping us with improvements on 53rd and 135th Street as well. The additional housing additions that you are currently viewing will increase the population dramatically. Our 2020 census indicated our population was 5,735. If you add just the last 3 years, you will add 1,360 for a total of 7,100 residents. We also have 2,000 housing units either under construction or pending. When those are completed, our population will exceed 12,000. When you combine that with our average student population, staff, and industrial park employees, that's an additional 10,000. Which clearly indicates the need for planning for additional roadways, roadway enhancements, and intersection improvements. It's imperative that we continue to plan for the enhancement of all the roadways that are feeding into these new additions. The Northeast traffic study by Transsystem clearly indicates that 45th Street from Tyler Road west to Mays Road must be enhanced. Tyler Road from 53rd Street south to 96 must be enhanced. An additional bridgeway over 96 on 45th is necessary. In addition, 119th Street, with all the new development from 29th Street north to 45th, will require planning and enhancement. And 53rd Street, Mays Road west to 135th, to accommodate the new industrial park partners that we will receive. We look forward to working with our partners, with Trans Systems, with WAMPO, with KDOT on our bridges, and with our county partner. And we look forward to any of the upcoming challenges here in the city of Mays, who is the fastest growing community in the state. We consider all these challenges opportunities. And remember, as we go forward, as we say here in the city of Mays, good things are happening in Mays.
Great job. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you for the presentation. Thanks for the great video. That was a really interesting. I need to get out west more often. Come out west, right? With that, we'll go on to committee and partner updates. Just a quick, and please, Commissioner, jump in at any time, but for the executive committee, we did meet on February 2nd. Most of the items that we covered were the consent agenda items that Kelly's already covered. So for time, I won't go over them again. We also discussed the election process and the carbon reduction grant, and then also an in-depth review of financials that we have always asked staff to present to us, and then had some robust questioning. The next executive committee meeting is May 4th at 11 a.m. They are open meetings, so anyone who wants to join us is certainly welcome to come. We meet here in this building in the second floor in the conference room. Does anybody have anything they want to add who was present, or any questions from anyone? All right, thank you. Seeing none, we'll go on to active transportation. Alan, do you have any updates for us today?
Yeah, I thought I'd let you know what's going on with the Active Transportation Committee. As you can see, we have tentatively scheduled our next meeting for September, which is quite a ways away. As I've explained to you before, we've done quite a bit of work in getting presentations from all the different cities, understanding what the existing active transportation plans in the region are and so forth. And our next step is to try to put those together and to develop a regional transportation plan. But in the meantime, thanks to funding from WAMPO, Wichita is in the process of updating its bicycle master plan. And of course, that will be a critical element of to incorporate into the regional plan. So we're going to be putting off our meetings until we make some progress on the update of that plan, and then resume and incorporate that. So looking forward to a little bit of respite and getting back to meeting in September.
Any questions for Alan? Ellen, thank you. It always warms my heart to have such engaged community members. So it's not lost on me all you do for Wichita. So thank you. And for the region. Safety and Health Committee. I don't see Jack here today. Ashley, you have an update?
Oh, I was just gonna see if he's online.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ashley.
Doesn't look like he is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you
Ashley,
want to get the update?
Yes.
On the safety committee, we have formed a committee that is more engaged, meeting more frequently with the help of the consulting firm that's hired. So the next set of meetings will be lot more frequent than the quarterly meetings that now meeting. And the next meeting that the safety advisors are meeting is on March 28th, right, Ashley? March 28th. So that's the update for now, and we'll provide more update. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, just Becky. Thank you, Chad. Wichita Transit is Mike. Are you going to present for Mike? Thank you.
Nate Hinkle with Wichita Transit. I'll keep this brief. Just highlighting a few items. We are currently working on a system redesign study that will be an RFP to go out for an analysis of our complete transit system, along with the outreach to community partners, stakeholders, our current customers, to evaluate our current transit system and ways that we may reevaluate our services and funding that would go with that as well. So that'll be going out here this spring. Also moving into the spring, we're going to be working on some cross promotion with bike share for first mile, last mile opportunities to bring greater awareness to both the transit and the bike share system that we have here in Wichita. We are moving into implementing safety management systems practices. That is a requirement from the Federal Transit Administration. That's to improve current safety practices, identify risks, hazards, and prevent future instances. Quickly touching on ridership, last year we surpassed 1 million rides for the first time since 2019. Ridership with a few different areas that we focus on performed exceptionally well. Our Veterans Ride Free program, which is a partnership with the VA United Way, saw nearly 50,000 rides last year, free trips for veterans. And then student ridership, both with Wichita Public Schools and Wichita State University, account for approximately 35% of our overall ridership throughout the year. So excellent utilization there. Looking at this year, just through the month of January, our ridership is about 18% higher than month over month long-term trend over January. So it looks like going into this year will also be another year of ridership gains. With that, happy to answer any questions.
Seeing none, thank you very much for the updates. I loved it all, but bike share, woo woo.
Thank you.
Glad to hear it continuing and growing and expanding. Next, Kansas Department of Transportation with Mike, but I think we have Tom.
I don't see Mike online.
Yep.
So I'm Tom Hine from KDOT here in Wichita. I wanted to update you on the North Junction project. Making good progress on that accelerated phase, which deals with I-235, I-135 and K-254 interchange. We have the southbound 135 to southbound 235 ramp open now for a number of months. We look forward to this summer, possibly, probably, depending on the weather this spring, opening that northbound I-135 to southbound 235, the 2-lane flyover that they're constructing now. So we're looking for that to open hopefully in the summer, if not August, September at the worst. And that project wraps up at the end of the year. And just last week, we started the other part of the North Junction improvements gold project, which focuses more on K96 and 135, that junction, a little bit south of what we consider the North Junction. So some work went on there today, putting up some barrier wall. Right now, we're not affecting traffic too much, but we all look forward to that as we wrap up the other part of the North Junction fix. We'll see more interruptions in traffic down a little bit south at K96 and 135. That project makes improvements mainly to that interchange at 135 and K96 south of the interchange that we're working on now. Any questions for me?
Yeah, Tom, just a quick question. I think we've talked about this before, but the ramp from westbound 254 to southbound 135, when do we anticipate that be open?
Right, that ramp closed on December 7th, and we thought that would just be a 2-month closure, but winter weather came in and kind of delayed a little bit. We look for a March 1st probability of opening that. So it's close, very close. And that'll be a welcome addition to that traffic that's been detoured over to Broadway, get off at Broadway, get back onto northbound 235 to go to southbound 135. Not a bad detour, but it'll be nice when that ramp's open.
All right. Any other questions for Tom? You're off the hook. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate the updates. Next, Wichita Metro Division, KDOT, Nick Squires. Oh, sorry, you're Nick too. Sorry, my bad. Last but not least, Federal Highway Administration. It said Richard and Cecily. Cecily had to leave early. Richard, are you with us to give updates today?
Yes, I am, Madam Chairperson, and welcome into your new role. And many thanks for the outgoing chairperson who did fantastically as well. Yes, Rick Backlund, Federal Highway Administration. A couple things. First off, a big announcement for tomorrow. The governor's office announced this around 1:30. Tomorrow, we're having a groundbreaking event in Overland Park for the US 69 express toll lanes. I will be there, and our new Federal Highway Administrator, Shaylin Bott, will be in Kansas. He's arriving tomorrow night, and there will be a press event along with Representative Sharice Davids. So that will be taking place Thursday, the actual groundbreaking event in Overland Park. So we've been spending quite a bit of time preparing for that. We're real pleased to have our new administrator come to Kansas, one of his very first states to visit since he just literally came on board. So we're looking forward to showing off the great state of Kansas a little bit. So also wanted to mention, first off, a big thank you to the staff just listening in this meeting of all the great work that they're advancing on to meet federal requirements. I know there's a lot going on, a lot of opportunities, and it's just great to see that that the staff of the WAMPO NPO is just so proactively working forward. And so I just want to compliment your staff on that. Back on February 1st, I sent out an email. Safe Streets for All grants came out. In Kansas, we had 12 awards across the state, just under $5 million. And more and more grant opportunities will be happening. I was just very pleased to see in these recent grant awards that I think probably the closest to Wichita was the city of Salina, but statewide we have a lot of competition and even a tribal nation that received money. So it's an exciting time, a lot more opportunities to come in transportation. In terms of our office, we're looking to have a discretionary grant specialist on board. Probably in the next 2 months, we're getting close on that. And then some additional positions we'll be filling just because of the amount of work. Our program size, just so that you all are aware, under bill has gone from 426 million to just under $500 million a year. So it's there's a lot, and this is just Kansas, considering the whole nation. So anyway, that's what I have to report. My apologies not being able to be there in person. I do hope to make it in person either hopefully in March. So that's what I have to report at this point. Any questions for me?
Any questions for Rick? Seeing none, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you in March.
Thank you.
All right, anything else for the good of the order? If not, I would move that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Oh, I'm sorry, I need a second. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, you can stay. See you March 14th. Thank you.